Moral development involves changes in our understanding of morality and also moral behaviors with age. So, this is the learning of what is right and what is wrong, what is good behavior, what is bad behavior, and the principles that underlie a person's morality and also their behavior. It's important to note that moral reasoning is actually a separate dimension from moral behavior, and you can think of it this way. Someone can know that it's wrong to steal, but still steal. And they can know that it's wrong to cheat on a test, but still cheat on a test. So there's some separation between what someone understands and how they reason about what a moral behavior or action is, but then also what they carry out. We'll also be talking about antisocial and pro-social behavior. So essentially behavior that's good and helps society versus behavior that is bad and is against society or violates social norms and rules. We talked about Piaget before in chapter 6 in his discussion of cognitive development, but he also developed his uh, theory of moral development. And he developed this theory, these categories or stages of moral development, when he was watching young children play the game of marbles. And that might be a little bit of an outdated game. Some of you might have actually played it before, but it's a game just like any other where there are rules and guidelines and people take turns. And it's quite possible that some people cheat, some people don't cheat, or follow rules or don't follow rules. So essentially, he was looking at how children consistently acted within the game of marbles, depending on their age. Now, kids who are in preschool age, they tend to act in a way that is pre-moral. They cheat. They are little cheaters all the time, and they don't follow the rules, and it doesn't really seem to matter. Now, when moral behavior first starts to emerge, it's following rules. And he labeled this age heteronomous morality. And this is at around 6 years of age when they start to understand that there are rules and they view them as sacred and unalterable, that these rules are set in stone and we absolutely have to follow the rules. And you'll hear kids at this age say things like, "No, we can't. That's against the rules." "Well, you can't do that. That's against the rules." Now, at this age, moral behavior is any behavior that's consistent with what authority figures like parents and teachers require. So parents and teachers or other authority figures set the rules, and it is important to follow them. And if one violates these rules, then they are going to be punished, and the punishment is consistent, that something bad is going to happen to them, regardless of intent. So they're not thinking about the intention of a person who violates a rule. And as children grow older, they understand that whether or not someone is punished, it kind of depends on whether they intended to break the rule or if it's just an accident. Younger kids, they don't think about that. If you break a dish, you deserve to be punished because it's against the rules to break a dish. And they're not really thinking that it was just an accident, so that person is not deserving of punishment. Autonomous morality evolves in children at about age 7 years, and they show more flexible view of rules, and they see that rules are self-chosen rather than just imposed on children. So they understand that adults make the rules, but those rules can change, those rules are flexible, and we have to consider other qualities when we're thinking about how someone should be punished, and intent is important there. If it's just an accident, then it's not fair to punish someone for something that wasn't really their fault, even if they're breaking a rule like don't break a glass. So they value fairness and equality, and they see rules as products of a group agreement and also instruments of a cooperative purpose. So rules serve a function, and if that function isn't working, then maybe the rules need to change. So rules are there, but they're flexible. Now, Kohlberg developed his perspective of moral reasoning as well, and this is a cognitive developmental perspective of moral development. Now, Kohlberg studied how people think about moral issues involving justice, fairness, and rights. And he studied a group of boys, so beginning at ages 10 and 13 and 16, and then he followed them longitudinally over time. He discovered that their reasoning about these issues progressed through sequential stages and that this happened in a predictable order. The way that he we identified what stage of moral reasoning a person is in is by giving them hypothetical dilemmas. So a dilemma is here on the screen, and I'll read it to you. But it's important to note that it's not what a person answers, like yes, they should be punished, or no, they shouldn't be punished. Instead, it's the reason that they give. The reason that they give leads to us classifying them into one stage versus another stage. So here's the Heinz dilemma. Near death, a woman with cancer learns of a drug that may save her. The woman's husband, Heinz, approaches the druggist who created the drug, but the druggist refuses to sell the drug for anything less than $2,000. After borrowing from everyone he knows, Heinz has only scraped together $1,000. Heinz asks the druggist to let him have the drug for $1,000 and he will pay him the rest later. The druggist says that it is his right to make money from the drug that he developed and refuses to sell it to Heinz. Desperate for the drug, Heinz breaks into the druggist's store and steals the drug. Should Heinz have done that? Why or why not? So I want to pause here for just a moment and have you think about your own answer. How would you respond to this? Should he have stolen the drug? Yes or no? And most importantly, why? Why are you answering that way? What are the reasons that you give for him to have stolen the drug or that he should not have stolen the drug? Now, children responded to this Heinz dilemma and then gave different reasonings for why he should or shouldn't steal the drug. And Kohlberg categorized these responses into different stages. So it's important to note that we've got 3 levels. We've got pre-conventional, conventional, and post-conventional. And then within each of those levels, we have 2 stages. So for pre-conventional reasoning, behavior is just governed by self-interest. So the desire to benefit from these decisions. Now, for stage 1, it's just a concern with punishment. So they want to avoid punishment and just gain pleasure, and that's it. So he'll just say, or a person at this stage might say, he should not steal the drug because he'll get punished and go to jail. Or they might say, yeah, he should steal it because he probably won't get caught. So you see that all they're concerned about is punishment, and that makes them determine what is morally right or wrong, and also what action they should take. Stage 2 is more of a concern about what others can do for them, and here you start to hear themes about fairness, what is fair, and then also reciprocity. So what can I get from this? So at this stage, a child may say, yes, he should save his wife and steal the drug because then his wife would be really nice to him. Notice that it's about what the wife will do for him. It's not about her life. It's not that her life is most important. It's that if he does this, then she'll be nice to him and he'll get something from it. So it's concerned about what others can do for them. Conventional reasoning involves socially driven decisions. We've got stage 3 and 4, and the first one is stage 3, and this is just upholding rules in order to please others and to gain affection and sympathy. So this is about maintaining social relationships, and I want you to think about when you were in middle school and high school. You may have noticed your own transition into this stage of moral development, where it wasn't necessarily that you were not going to go do a bad thing because you didn't want to get punished for it, but instead you might think, well, I don't want to do that because my mom would be really disappointed in me, and I don't want my mom to be disappointed in me. I don't want her to be upset with me. I care about maintaining that relationship and not upsetting her. So that's about pleasing others. Stage 4 is maintaining social order. This idea that rules and standards need to be there because we're concerned about maintaining social order, that if everyone broke the rules, then there would just be chaos in society. So there's a purpose for these rules and standards, and we have to follow it. It's like a social contract that we all have. So everyone should follow the rules, or it would just be a chaotic nightmare. Then the last level is post-conventional reasoning, and this involves moral principles that value respect for individual rights above all else. So we have autonomous decision-making based on these moral principles, and it values respect for individual rights above everything. So stage 5 involves seeing that laws themselves can be immoral, and they can violate the the rights of others. And so we need to work to change laws that are immoral. So think about the laws related to segregation back in the 1950s, with African American individuals being required to use different water fountains in bathrooms and sit at the back of the bus. Now that was a law, but the law itself was immoral and unfair. So a person at stage 5 would say that this law itself is immoral and we need to work to change it. So it's flexible and changeable. Stage 6, you see that a person is defined by their abstract ethical principles, and they're universal and valid for all people regardless of the law. So for example, an ethical principle could be the principle of equality and respect for human dignity, or the principle of life is sacred and above all else. And in this case, a person would also behave in accordance to their ethical principles, even if it was violating the law. And very few people reach this level because of that. So think of a person like, Gandhi or Mandela. They have violated social laws and end up getting in trouble for it, but they are living their lives according to their personal moral code more so than anything else. Children develop and hone their understanding of morality, through social interactions with their parents, with their peers. Think about having fights with their siblings over toys. It gives them the opportunity to think about issues like fairness and justice, that a person should be punished for behaving wrong or for being mean, and what is fair. What's fair is that I get equal to my sibling. And parent-child relationships, when they're high quality, they predict advanced moral reasoning. So when parents actually speak to their children about other people's perspectives, about what is right and what is wrong, and thinking about, well, when you take your toy from your sister, it really hurts her and she's really sad. When parents are warm and they take time to explain to children about these moral issues, then this leads to greater advanced moral reasoning in children. Now, there's a major criticism of Kohlberg's theory, and it's that his research was conducted only on males. And we even see that males and females tend to reason differently in Kohlberg's stages, and more females tend to be categorized as stage 3, whereas more males tend to be categorized as stage 4. And some have suggested that this is actually a bit biased, that it's kind of arbitrary whether the orientation to maintaining social relationships should be 3rd or it should be 4th. It's kind of putting the social contract as 4th and kind of suggesting that a man's morality orientation is inherently higher than the average woman's. So there have been some competing theories with this. Carol Gilligan proposed that instead of having a stage 3 and a stage 4, it's more like a care orientation versus a justice orientation. And a care orientation is characterized by a desire to maintain relationships and a responsibility to not cause a person harm. And this tends to be the female mode of moral reasoning. Whereas justice orientation is based on these abstract principles of fairness and also individualism. And this is more of a male mode of reasoning. However, most people do engage in both forms of reasoning. So it's not that it's one or the other, but perhaps there's more of an emphasis on one versus another. Kohlberg viewed the process of moral development as universal and similar across cultures. And research does show the sequence appears in all cultures. However, people in non-Western cultures rarely score above stage 3. So they tend to be locked into about stage 3 and not get into these higher levels of moral reasoning. Now, Western cultures tend to emphasize the rights of others. So you may have heard the terms individualistic versus collectivistic cultures. In individualistic Western cultures, with emphasizing the rights of the individual, it makes sense that justice would be more represented, thinking about what is fair according to the law, and so that everyone has an equal chance and equal rights, that people's individual rights are not violated. Whereas in non-Western cultures that tend to focus more on interdependence or collectivism, there is a bit more of a focus on relating to others. So thinking about what is fair and equal and good for the community as opposed to the individual. Now, individuals do show similarities in their moral reasoning. People across cultures are able to reason using both care and justice orientations, though cultures give each form of reasoning a slightly different weight. Now, yet another approach was proposed by John Haidt. Haidt argues that individuals' moral behavior is based on intuitive gut reactions rather than reasoning. We have an initial gut reaction, that this is right or wrong, or this is what a person should do. And then after that initial gut reaction, our moral reasoning kicks in, and it occurs to justify our decision. So cognition comes after our initial gut decision. Kind of an interesting perspective. So let's move on a little bit to social conventions. So this is relating a bit more to what people should do, so rules and moral behavior, but then also social conventions like customs and norms. What is appropriate behavior? So there's a difference here, right? A rule or a law is you do not steal. But a social convention is that you do not eat with your, you don't eat salad with your fingers. So those are different. One is more of a morality issue and the other is more of a behavior social norm issue. And children are able to distinguish between moral imperatives, which concern people's rights and welfare, that it's wrong to steal from others, and social conventions, also called social customs, that it's inappropriate to eat food with your fingers. Violations of moral imperatives or moral rules are seen as more deserving of punishment than social conventions, and these rules are also less alterable than social conventions. Children can also differentiate among personal issues. So these are matters of personal choice, like what a person wants to wear or what they want to watch on TV. This doesn't violate the rights of others. It's just a personal issue. Cross-cultural research suggests that children in different cultures differentiate among moral, social, conventional, and personal issues. The cultural differences in socialization contribute to children's conceptions. So, for example, a study of Chinese children ages 3 to 6 found that children considered personal issues, their preferences, as permissible and up to the child, not the adult's decision, just like in Western samples. However, the Chinese children, when asked about the consequences of breaking a moral rule, focused on issues like fairness and the effects on the welfare of others, whereas Western children focused on avoiding punishment. This is consistent with the differences that we talked about earlier between individualistic and collectivistic cultures in reference to their morality and reasoning. Moving on to pro-social behavior, just some quick definitions. We define pro-social behavior as voluntary behavior that benefits another person. So if you're helping someone pick up books that they dropped on the floor, or you're holding a door open for someone who's behind you, you're doing someone a favor, helping someone with chores, those are all pro-social behaviors. And these are usually motivated by empathy, our capacity or ability to understand someone's feelings, to understand when someone is happy, when someone is sad, etc. Now, infants may have a basic sense of empathy even before they have the capacity to demonstrate it. So if infants see puppets acting out different scenarios, and one is the helper and the other is a hinderer, so they get in the way of someone achieving a goal, they will prefer the helper and want the hinderer to be punished. There is a great 60 Minutes segment on this. They actually show some researchers in a research lab testing babies on these decisions and how they examine it. So look at this video. It's called Baby Morality. And again, it's a 60 Minutes video available on YouTube. Toddlers show increasingly pro-social responses to others' emotional and physical distress. They respond with expressions of concern and comfort, and even show nervous system activation, suggesting that they themselves have become distressed. In early childhood, children begin to increase their emphasis on fairness and sharing. So if you ask them to distribute candy, they'll often have them themes of equality, so everyone should get the same amount, or fairness, she's older, so she should get more. And also, they show sharing, and they share more with others who have shared with them. This helping, sharing, and other pro-social behaviors increases from school age into adolescence. And they give sophisticated explanations for who deserves what. And that's based on merit, need, and equality. So they're thinking about this in a more complex, mature manner. Now, this pro-social behavior is linked with quite a few measures of positive adjustment, and I'll just go through these pretty quickly. Social competence, positive social interactions with peers, having friends, low levels of aggressive behavior, and externalizing problems. Uh, they have greater success in school, higher scores on measures of vocabulary, reading, and language. Pro-social behavior, such as volunteering, this continues through adulthood, and it's not just helpful for others, it's actually associated with better mental health in the individual who volunteers themselves. So it's good to keep giving and keep helping others. Now, the question of what influences a person, what causes a person to be more helpful and giving to others compared to other individuals. So we see genetic and temperamental influences. So genetic factors are thought to contribute to these individual differences. Several genes are implicated, especially one that influences the hormone oxytocin. And this hormone is associated with attachment and socio-emotional behaviors. So, just thinking about oxytocin, this is also the chemical that is released shortly after birth and is believed to perhaps help the mother and baby develop that bond. Also, temperament influences. And we talked about temperament in chapter 11. The temperamental influences affect how a child regulates emotion. And this is related to feelings of empathy and, in turn, whether empathetic feelings result in personal distress or pro-social behavior. Now, for influences from the family. Pro-social behavior is socialized continuously from birth via active social engagement with parents, in which rich interactions with parents engage these emotions, thoughts, behaviors, critical to pro-social responding. Parents actively encourage pro-social behavior by including children in household and caregiving activities. And even think about how young kids sometimes have, a broom that's their own size that they can push around while mom's doing the actual sweeping. Parents describe feelings and model the use of language to discuss these feelings, and that helps toddlers understand others' emotional states. So they'll talk about, oh, they're sad, or, they're really disappointed, or they're really angry, and that helps kids develop understanding of emotions and learn how to recognize them. Parents who are warm and encouraging and model sympathetic concern give rise to preschoolers who are more likely to display concern in response to others' distress. Then siblings. Siblings offer opportunities to learn and to practice helping and other pro-social behaviors. So very similar to parents, they can be models of this pro-social behavior, and then sometimes also offer discussions of pro-social behavior too, depending on their age. Pro-social behavior is influenced by the broader social world, and these cultural differences, they've come up in previous slides in this lecture, so it seems slightly repetitive, but we'll just be sure that we cover this effectively. So collectivistic cultures, in which people live with extended families, work is shared, and the maintenance of positive relationships with others is emphasized, they tend to promote pro-social values and behaviors more so than individualistic cultures. And pro-social behavior is also associated with measures of cognitive maturation, self-regulation, and perspective taking. And this makes sense. Brain maturity allows you to process information better. Self-regulation helps a person maintain control of their own emotion better. This means you're understanding emotions, you're able to control your own emotions, and you're able to take others' perspectives better, which means that you can understand what others feel, process that information, and control your own behavior and act in ways that make them feel better. So all of those variables are related to this pro-social behavior. Self-control involves the ability to manage one's own behavior, and this is initially motivated by external demands, like warnings or reminders to behave from parents and caregivers. And so this starts to cause self-control, that you're going to get in trouble if you do this behavior, and so they learn to control themselves. But this develops rapidly into self-guidance, so they act in ways that are appropriate to the situation that they've learned over time. Delay of gratification is an actual research task in which children are told to wait a period of time to achieve a reward. And I encourage you to go on YouTube and look up the marshmallow test. This is a test of delayed gratification where they put kids in front of a marshmallow and they say, okay, here's a marshmallow. If you just wait, don't eat it until I get back, then you'll get two. So they're given a small reward immediately, or they can wait for a much larger reward if they want. So this is the ability to resist temptation, and this increases with age. So in this video, you will see the youngest children eat the marshmallow immediately. They don't even think about stopping and waiting for the larger reward. Whereas kids who are older are better able to resist the temptation, and they use different techniques to help distract themselves or deal with the temptation. So these are delay strategies, how children can regulate their behavior. So they tend to wait longer when they're focused on the abstract qualities of the reward rather than the consumable qualities. So thinking about the pleasure that they will feel as opposed to, that they're going to get a marshmallow. And they also wait longer when instructed to focus on the task and less when they make reward-oriented statements. If you keep the reward out of sight, it also helps to resist temptation, and also emphasizing the goal. So that you'll get more in the end rather than have less now. So waiting for the payoff long term, that helps a child to resist that temptation. Now, there are individual differences in self-control during childhood, and this has implications for later functioning. Self-control in preschool predicts behavior in adolescence and early adulthood. And low self-control in preschool is linked with more risky behaviors, being overweight, poor school performance as adolescents, criminal activity, poor health, poor employment outcomes, lower income, and lower savings in adulthood. And it makes sense. I mean, if you're unable to resist temptation, then you're making poor choices. You're buying whatever you want right now. You're stealing that thing just to get that immediate gratification and not thinking about the long term and how it will lead to a poor long-term outcome overall. Moral behavior can be acquired through modeling. We call this social learning. This is watching others act in moral or immoral ways. And also, moral behavior is shaped through reinforcement and punishment. That when kids do a good behavior, they may be rewarded for it. If they do something bad, they may be punished for it. So that's reinforcement and punishment. Now, in terms of modeling, whether or not a child picks up moral or immoral behaviors has to do with attention, whether or not they're actually paying attention to it. They're also more likely to imitate a competent and powerful model, also a model that is of the same gender that the child identifies with. And they're also more likely to imitate a model that is perceived to be warm and responsive rather than cold and distant. Children develop internalized standards of conduct based on reinforcements and punishments, observing others, and considering their explanations for behavior. These adopted standards are then used by children as guides for behavior. It essentially becomes our internal code of morality. Children are also affected by the consequences of their behaviors. Discipline is a method, or several methods, that parents use to teach children and socialize their children toward acceptable behavior. And there are three approaches to discipline: withdrawing love, or called love withdrawal. So withholding attention, affection, or approval when a child misbehaves. So a parent may say, "Go away until you can be nice." Power assertion. This is controlling the child's behavior through the use of power, such as spankings, commands, and physical restraint. A parent may say, "Enough, I'm taking your toy away," and then spank him. Then induction, explaining why a behavior is wrong, emphasizing how it affects other people, and providing a better option or suggestions on how the child can undo the damage. They may say something like, "Look at how your cousin is crying. Pushing and hitting hurts. See how sad he is? How about we take turns and share the toy?" It's important to note that love withdrawal and power assertion are not effective in promoting pro-social behavior, and in fact, they can even hinder development of pro-social behavior. Children, in this case, are motivated to obey their parents out of fear that they're losing parents' love, or fear of being spanked. And these kids are at risk of developing internalizing problems such as anxiety and depression, Also externalizing problems, such as conduct problems and less pro-social behavior. Punishment is an unpleasant consequence for a bad behavior. Physical punishment, also known as corporal punishment or spanking, is linked with a whole host of negative outcomes. And this is often something that's difficult to convince students of, because many students experienced spankings when they were younger. And although some students do say that they did not find it enjoyable, well, none of them really enjoyed it, but some found it to be ineffective and some found it to be very effective. But just because you personally found it effective doesn't necessarily mean that it's effective for everyone. And also, we have to keep in mind that it may be linked to some problems, that maybe it did make you behave at that particular moment, but then there could be some long-term consequences. Physical punishment is linked with emotional and social problems, difficulty accurately interpreting others' actions and words. They're more likely to attribute hostile intentions, thinking others are trying to hurt them. So they're not hearing kind of explanations of other people's feelings and explanations of behaviors, and instead they're just being spanked. So they have a hard time interpreting and figuring out what people mean. It's also damaging to the parent-child relationship. The child may feel helpless, become fearful of the parent, avoid the parent, or even become very passive. And it tends to only temporarily increase compliance. That children, when they're going to be spanked, they're fearful, and so they do what the parent says right then, but that doesn't necessarily mean that they're going to become compliant long term, or maybe they'll just sneak behind the parent's back and still misbehave. Now, effective punishment has some important factors. It occurs immediately after a dangerous behavior, so they have a consequence right after the behavior happens, not days later. In that case, it's hard to make a connection. It's applied consistently, so when they misbehave, they always get the same similar punishment, and it's always consistently done. Otherwise, it's hard to tell that the punishment is actually following or linked to that immoral or bad behavior. Also, effective punishment doesn't humiliate the child. That just causes more resentment, hatred, anger. Also, it's administered calmly, privately, within the context of a warm parent-child relationship, and is accompanied by an explanation, so the child can actually understand why they were punished. A timeout is an effective consequence for children. This involves removing a child from the situation and from social contact for a short period of time, like putting them in a timeout chair or a timeout corner. This is often effective at reducing inappropriate behavior, especially if accompanied by an explanation and a warm relationship, and it's done in a way that's not embarrassing to the child. So it's a parenting technique that is well supported by psychologists. Inductive discipline involves methods that use reasoning. These are effective alternatives to spanking and changing a child's behavior. So, for example, helping a child find and use words to express their feelings, providing children with choices like, do you want peas or carrots? Right? It gives them some control over the situation and leads to more positive behaviors. Parents who use inductive techniques model effective conflict resolution and help children become aware of the consequences of their actions. These methods are very effective in helping children to internalize rules and standards, whereas punishment brings attention to themselves and their feelings, right? How they're upset that they're being punished and they're resentful and mad for parents scolding and spanking them. Whereas it's not as focused on how their behavior affects others. So inductive techniques focuses on others, and instead these punishment techniques brings attention to themselves and the punishment itself. The American Association of Pediatrics recommends that parents positively reinforce good behavior and, when necessary, discourage inappropriate behavior with the use of a timeout, removal of privileges, and verbal reprimands aimed at the behavior rather than the child. It's not that you're lazy, right, but the behavior is inappropriate or that the behavior needs to change. Effectiveness of disciplinary techniques may differ by cultural context. Expectations for behavior as well as methods of discipline vary within culture. For example, North American parents permit and encourage children to express emotions, including anger, while Japanese parents encourage children to refrain from strong emotions. Japanese parents are more likely to use reasoning empathy, and disapproval to discipline their children, which is more effective for Japanese mothers because of the strong mother-child relationship and collectivistic values that are prevalent in Japan, illustrating the importance of relationships in that culture. Now, changing gears here to antisocial behavior. Antisocial is a word that is often misused in our everyday vocabulary, or I should say, just has a different meaning in the real world as opposed to within psychology. Now, let's say that a friend says, "Hey, you want to go out to dinner?" And you may say, "Oh, I'm just feeling really antisocial tonight." What you probably mean there is that you just don't feel like going out and socializing. That's not what antisocial means in this context. Antisocial in the context of psychology is referring to behavior that harms others, is disruptive or hostile, it transgresses social norms, think against society. So when you want to stay home and you don't want to go to dinner, you're not thinking about going against society and harming others. You just kind of want to be alone. So it's a very different concept. Make sure that you're clear on that. One main component of antisocial behavior is aggression. This is behavior that harms or violates the rights of others, whether overtly or covertly, so out in the open on purpose, or covertly, secretively, like stealing. Aggression is common in childhood. In fact, toddlers are the most aggressive group of people on the planet. And they engage in, most commonly, instrumental aggression. And this is aggression that's oriented toward achieving a goal, like getting a toy or taking another child's pacifier. So they'll, push a child down and yank the pacifier out of their mouth and walk away with it. They're not really thinking about harming others. They only have the goal of getting the pacifier. This typically appears at about 1 year of age and increases from toddlerhood into early childhood. Relational aggression is a verbal form of aggression, and it harms others in social relationships. It's more common in girls than in boys. And some common examples in preschool and elementary school involve name calling, excluding peers from play groups, spreading rumors about others, damaging reputations. Those are all relational aggression behaviors. This increases as children's language skills improve. And also, physical aggression declines at this time through elementary school and high school, but there are still individual differences in physical aggression. Though most kids show declines, some continue to use physical aggression and to force others and intimidate others. And these are the bullies. Bullies may actually get worse in adolescence as they grow older and learn to control others and dominate over others. These bullies may engage in peer victimization. This is an ongoing interaction in which a child repeatedly attempts to inflict physical, verbal, or social harm on another child. So this could involve hitting, kicking, name-calling, teasing, shunning them, excluding them from groups, or humiliating the other child. Physical bullying is the most common in childhood. Verbal forms of bullying, including bullying on social media, increase during childhood and then remain in adolescence. So it's really something to look out for, because sometimes social media bullying is a bit of a quiet and hidden type of bullying that isn't obvious to parents and teachers, but can absolutely have a strong negative impact on the victim. So there are a few common characteristics of bullies. For boys, they tend to be above average in size, they tend to use physical aggression, and they target both boys and girls. Whereas girls are verbally assertive. They make their statements well known. They are not passive in their communication. They tend to target other girls, and they use relational aggression most commonly, so ridiculing, embarrassing, or spreading rumors. Both girls and boys who are bullies tend to be impulsive, domineering, and they show little anxiety or insecurity in peer contexts. Bullying can be helpful in maintaining prestige. Relationally aggressive children are frequently perceived as being cool, powerful, and popular. So they seem to gain and feel a sense of reward from bullying and putting others down. So when we want to reduce bullying, perhaps we want to give children other ways of looking cool and powerful and popular other than hurting other kids. Now, physically aggressive bullies display a range of problems. They tend to be hyperactive, show poor school achievement, and perceive less support from teachers, and also tend to have higher rates of depression as well. Now, victims of bullying tend to be inhibited, frail in appearance, and younger than their peers. Bullies often pick victims because they're particularly weak or stand out in some way. They're perceived as different or as more quiet and cautious. They tend to feel lonely, they're less happy, they have fewer friends. And many victim characteristics like shyness, passivity, social withdrawal, non-assertive styles of interaction, anxiety, depression, or emotional control. Any of these characteristics are present even before the child becomes a target of victimization. Then these qualities are amplified and made worse and more severe by the victimization. For reactive aggression, this is a different type of aggression which involves an aggressive response that's provoked by an insult, a confrontation, or frustration. So they're reacting to something in their environment. Some victims respond with reactive aggression rather than becoming passive and withdrawn. They act out and they become very aggressive in retaliation. Those who show reactive aggression may also have a tendency to see a threat in an ambiguous or unclear situation. So a greater tendency to interpret threat even when threat isn't present and then act out in aggressive ways. Now, bullies who are also victims, we refer to them as like bully victims, they share characteristics of both bullies and victims, but they tend to function more poorly than either. In ways that they're like victims, they tend to have high levels of anxiety and depression and low rates of social acceptance and self-esteem. Whereas similar to bullies, they have high levels of aggression, impulsivity, and poor self-control. They show difficulty in managing emotions, and they tend to be the most disliked members of a classroom. Patterns of bullying can be broken by changing the victim's negative perceptions of themselves and helping them acquire skills to maintain relationships with peers, and also teaching them to respond in helpful ways. Parents and teachers should help bullies learn to identify, understand, and manage their peers' emotions, as well as to direct anger in safe and appropriate ways. Teachers, when they're aware of bullying and also aware that they can effectively help, and if they're willing to intervene, they can make a difference. So we need to make them aware, make them feel effective, and help with them feeling willing and able to help. I encourage you to see table 12.1 in the text for tips to intervene in bullying from multiple roles, with a focus on the child, the parent, and the school. Delinquent or illegal activity becomes more common in adolescence. It increases in early adolescence, continues in middle adolescence, and then tends to decline in late adolescence and into early adulthood as we start to take on more adult responsibilities and roles. Once you start your adulting, then you tend to shape up and commit less illegal activities. Most activities are mild and don't continue into adulthood. So it could be little things like small vandalism like tagging with a marker or stealing small items. That is pretty common and then doesn't continue once adolescents really gain perspective about how they could be damaging their futures and then take on those adult roles. Most young people whose delinquent activity persists and evolves into a life of crime show multiple problematic behaviors, and this tends to begin in childhood, not adolescence, and we call that childhood onset conduct disorder. Conduct disorder is a psychiatric diagnosis that refers to a severe form of antisocial behavior. And this is characterized by aggressive behaviors that involve destruction of property, stealing or robbing others, or causing pain to others, like getting into physical fights or animal cruelty. They tend to show more serious behavioral problems even beginning at a younger age. Now, aggression has many influences, both genetic and environmental. Several genes have been associated with antisocial behavior, and early experiences are thought to have an epigenetic effect on the expression of genes. So early traumatic or early exposure to violence can kind of awaken these genes for more antisocial negative behaviors. In regards to brain development, immaturity or impairments in the prefrontal cortex is associated with poor planning, reduced ability to sustain attention, poor ability to evaluate emotions, and reduced ability to process rewards and punishments. And all of these increase the risk of aggressive, impulsive responses. So they're more sensitive to rewards and then less sensitive to punishment, and have a hard time planning and evaluating their own emotions. They also tend to have an immature underactive amygdala. They fail to signal or grasp the value of an aversive stimulus, like a punishment, which might otherwise inhibit their behavior. So they have less fear, they have less likelihood of kind of responding negatively to the punishments, and instead a very strong sense of reward when they engage in something exciting or fun. Parents who are inconsistent, highly controlling, and or negligent, also accompanied by harsh punishment or low in parental monitoring, all of these behaviors can increase aggressive tendencies in children and adolescents. Also, exposure to aggressive models. Bandura's Bobo doll studies, which are discussed in the book, showed that exposure to aggressive models can absolutely lead to increased aggression in teenagers and children. Moving on to the issue of religion and spirituality. Religiosity, or religiousness, as it's also referred to, it is religious involvement, sharing the attitudes and beliefs of religion, participating in the practices like attending services, engaging in prayer, all of that is related to religiosity. Now, spirituality is a more general term, and it means a search for meaning beyond the self. So it may refer to a higher entity like a god, or some other entity like nature, but it involves searching for ways to benefit others and society. And religiosity and spirituality, they may co-occur, but they don't have to. So some people may identify as being spiritual, but not as being religious. That's entirely possible. Now, most people have their first experiences in religion with religion in childhood. Often it's parents and family who expose them to church services and traditions and whatnot. Children learn about religion through formal education, like attending Sunday school or parochial schools. And parents play an important role in socialization, and often children simply just adopt their parents' religious beliefs and sometimes don't give it much thought. Religious development is not simply a matter of passive socialization. Learning about religion is an active process in which children construct meaning about religion, and they try to understand, what does this mean, what do I believe, and what do I understand? Although often they do quite fall in line with the religious practices and religious beliefs of their families. Adolescence is a critical phase for religious and spiritual development. Cognitive development fuels change in religiosity and spirituality. And this is because they can apply abstract reasoning to consider religious concepts and question their beliefs. They can consider multiple perspectives, and thus they consider alternative views on religion. Identity development includes questions about religiosity. However, most don't commit to a religious or spiritual identity in adolescence. This actually continues into early adulthood. Religious commitment in adolescence is associated with a variety of positive outcomes, including pro-social behavior, self-esteem, well-being, and less risky behavior and problem behaviors. The chart on the slide shows some trends in religiosity and spirituality in the United States. Adults in the United States tend to maintain consistent levels of religiosity and spirituality. Some research suggests an increase in religious intensity and strength of beliefs over time. Socioeconomic and ethnic differences in religious participation reveal that low socioeconomic status ethnic minority groups show the highest rates of religious participation. So African Americans, those of Hispanic, Native American descent, and also Canadian Aboriginal elders showed the greatest participation in religion. Religiosity and spirituality are linked with many positive outcomes. So improved physical health, like more exercise, reduced hypertension, increased longevity, greater well-being. It offers a buffer to stress in the face of disadvantage and stressful life events. And it's also associated with optimism, self-worth, life satisfaction, and lower rates of depression. So there are some benefits to identifying with religiosity, though not everyone may align with those beliefs. All right, thank you, everyone. Have a wonderful day.